Today, I want to talk about a few topics, but they're all going to weave together into a narrative that I think makes sense and is very important. And what it is basically the ICE incident that happened in Minnesota, and then more broadly, what the reaction to that says about our culture. And then finally, something that I think I have been talking about a little bit more recently, which is ideological consistency and how people have been wildly inconsistent on things that to me look like the same thing, right? Where, hey, if you believe this, you should also believe this. But if you're in one of the two camps, you're not. Or usually people are not ideologically consistent, and they don't hold the same view on both things. So I'm gonna take a look at the video, get right into it, because I kind of want to weave that all together and make it make sense for you. I promise it's a very good discussion, and we'll get into it.
But then you have this corresponding increase in violence. And the question was by the incident in Minnesota 2 days ago, where a woman who was part of the protest, who had gone there specifically to participate in the protest against ICE, to seemingly impede ICE officers as part of the protest, was shot and killed as she tried to drive away from the ICE agents who were demanding she get out of her car. There's pretty much a consensus on the right that's very pro-ICE that the shooting was justified and that she got what she deserved because an ICE agent...
Which I wouldn't go that far, right? I feel like that is kind of a little bit too far, right? I think any loss of human life is unfortunate. I think there are some circumstances that it just, hey, this is what happened. It was a series of poor decisions that led up to it. But yeah, I think celebrating it, hey, this woman got what she deserved. Hey, any sort of celebration of it is not great. It kind of says some things about the person who is doing it. I thought that with Charlie Kirk. I think that with this incident, you say, yes, this woman may have been at fault, but you shouldn't be celebrating her basically loss of life.
Was in front of the car as it was pulling out, and the claim is that he justifiably feared for his life and was therefore entitled not to try and get out of the way, but just to shoot her in the head, which he did. And then there are huge amounts of people more on the left. I don't mean the real left. I mean just like kind of left of center, who are pretty unanimous that this was an absolutely unjustified murder. We've kind of covered some angles of that, but I think what I want to talk about, and actually there's this suggestion within the question about it. And actually, before I do, you probably have seen most of the videos. To me, the key factor, as I've said before, is the fact that when she was pulling out, she was getting away. The ICE agents had tried to pull her out of her car, open the door. She pulled away and immediately turned her steering wheel to the right, which is exactly what you would do if you were trying to get out of the situation and flee, as opposed to running down an ICE agent. But as I said, I understand how people see that differently. There would be investigations. I think it's disturbing that we have government officials like J.D. Vance and others who are pronouncing basically a verdict in this case. I don't think that's the responsibility or even the right of political leaders to do. But that is to me how it looked. But again,
just on that point, I feel like it's kind of whatever, because both sides do it, and like it's hard to hold one side to account not to do it when the other side runs out and does the exact same thing. So I don't think you can cast too many aspersions on them. I wish they would all bring down the rhetoric, but this is where we are. Because I think both sides, justifying it on the left and vilifying it on the right, cause this to be a more likely outcome. So, and I think that's pretty much inarguable.
A lot of people see it differently. So there was a newly released video today. This is cell phone footage taken from the phone of the ICE agent who actually did the shooting. And the minute it was released to something called Alpha News, a very pro-Trump, MAGA, right-wing news outlet. It seems like ICE gave it to them. That's almost certainly where it came from, the cell phone of the ICE agent. And the conservatives immediately began declaring that this is definitive proof that she did in fact try to run him over, and he was therefore justified in shooting her. Everybody who does not have that view of ICE does not see this video that way. So I'm just going to show it to you since it's a new video. Some of you may not have seen it. Again, this is from the cell phone of the ICE agent who ended up drawing his gun and aiming at her and shooting her fatally.
And what I will say about this is, one, I actually did want to wait to cover it until Glenn covered it, right? Glenn Greenwald covered it, because I view him as, I think he is very ideologically consistent. So I wanted to see what his take was on it, just because I don't view him, again, he stays the course. He's not putting himself through mental gymnastics to try and justify because it aligns with his party views. So that's number one. I love his coverage, and especially on hot button issues like this, which you can kind of tell he doesn't think it was justified. And so I don't even necessarily agree with his viewpoint, but I just like to see where he falls on it and what he thinks. And the other thing too about this is that I am very glad that he chose to show this video, because again, I'll watch both sides' coverage, and it seemed like, and I think he rightly calls it out, right-wingers were showing this video. Like all of them exclusively showed this video because it is very damning, and it makes you able to, I'll let you get in, I'll get into it before explaining it further, but it's very easy to vilify the woman from this video. Versus the left, where anyone who's more left aligned has showed an alternative angle where it's far away. It's basically a camera from someone's house that they got footage on it, and then it looks like he doesn't actually get hit by the vehicle. So yeah, I think both sides, again, they're just curating, they're taking whatever footage best suits their narrative. So I was very interested. This is why I was so interested to see what he used to dissect it, and hey, here's what I think happened, and give his opinion on it, is because again, he's more in the center, and let's see which footage he uses. So that was another reason why I was very interested to see, because once again, I view both sides, I look at it from both sides, and I have seen a very disingenuous use of, hey, what footage best suits our narrative. So again, good to see him using this, and then he can talk through what he thinks. And then again, I don't want to dwell too much on this, so I'll provide my feedback as well as to what I think is going on with it. But I want to move past it, because again, I think the more important point is what else I'm going to talk about. And for additional context, there is, again, one that the right wing has been using where she literally just backed in, she's obstructing the road, and this is just context that I viewed that kind of helped form my opinion, but she was obstructing this lane, people were having to go around her, it was slowing down traffic, and she was just, in my opinion, what she was probably doing was honking, trying to make everyone aware that ICE is coming and slow them down. Again, that's just context for it. That's, again, I don't think that justifies her being shot, but to try and, I have seen it framed from people more on the left that she wasn't doing anything wrong, she just pulled over to let her significant other / girlfriend out. And her girlfriend is obviously agitating, which we'll see here in a second. But she wasn't doing anything wrong. She was waving people by, and I think that just seems like it was plausible deniability where she could say, if she got arrested or whatever, oh yeah, I was waving people by. But it's like, obviously you are intending to obstruct lanes. There was an entire area where you could have pulled off to the side, and you obviously didn't do that. You knew what you were doing in this instance, and she was like dancing back and forth while she was honking, and it was just a whole thing. So just some context I want to add to it, just in case you haven't seen those videos, but we'll continue.
Show your face. I'm not mad. That's okay. We don't change our plates every morning, just so you know. It'll be the same plate when you come talk to us later. That's fine.
And they have out-of-state plates. It's been claimed they live there, but they have out-of-state plates. So I don't know that anyone actually truly has any sort of understanding of what exactly was going on here. But yes, they have out-of-state plates, and it's from pretty far away. So I believe it's Missouri. So yeah, this is happening in Minnesota. So what is going on with that? I don't claim to know, and I don't really care. I'm just looking at what is actually going on and what was their intent and all that kind of stuff.
U.S. citizen, former fucking veteran. You want to come at us? You want to come at us? I say go get yourself some lunch, big boy. Go ahead.
And I think, once again, in trying to craft a narrative, this woman which is the significant other of the woman driving the vehicle, this has been probably why the Republicans have used this video, is because it's very hard to feel sympathetic towards someone who is so aggressive in this manner. Like, just imagine she was talking to you this way. You would probably not be so interested in having the amount of restraint that in the second, obviously he pulls his gun and shoots the driver, but in this second he is showing restraint towards her. So again, this is probably why the right wing, Fox News and all these news organizations have chosen to use this footage. Because once again, she's not a very sympathetic figure in this instance.
Car. Get out of the fucking car.
And you can hear the officers are yelling. You can't see it from this angle, but they're advancing onto her from the driver's side. They're telling her, get out of the car, get out of the car, get out of the car. And then, yeah, we'll continue. You can see she pulled back. She starts driving. You can't see exactly the right side of the car, but the girlfriend says, drive, baby, drive. So she is telling her, hey, flee, which is kind of insane because, like, why would you be obstructing if you were not expecting to face some sort of, police orders, right? Get out of your car, get out of the way, you're obstructing justice. Again, does not justify the shooting, but we'll continue. And right there, that is the thing where and this is what informs my opinion about what happened, is that and go back and just listen to it again if you need to, but you can hear he gets hit, whether it's just his leg or whatever. At that point in time, I look at it and I say, it's assault with a deadly weapon, or attempted assault with a deadly weapon. Well, I guess assault, because he gets hit, right? And so at that point in time, you meet whatever force it is with an equal force. I think that allows you to have an equal force. They were telling you to get out of the car. Like, I have never had a police try and pull me over and I get into a high-speed chase, right? I've never, you have to, I understand that it's a high pressure situation. She's probably freaking out. She's afraid that she's gonna, get taken in by ICE and detained or whatever. But then you shouldn't have been in that situation to begin with. I'm sorry, you shouldn't have been agitating. And again, that doesn't justify her being shot, but when you are pulling out with your vehicle, yes, you may have been trying to avoid him, but you saw the guy in front of you, and it's assault. If you were to get in front of my car and I try to run you over, you're most likely done. Like, you're dead. That's what's happening. And so once again, and this is why I say stay tuned for the whole thing, because you might not like that answer, but I will tell you, I am very ideologically consistent with this. I hold it true for every other instance where this has happened. And yeah, it's that is the bigger point that I'm going to make here, but I want to break down to show you how I got to my opinion on this and where I stand, how I got there, and again, just show you that you need to stay ideologically consistent, because it's very easy to flip-flop back on, if you're entrenched on either side, flip-flop back over and just, oh yeah, when it's happening to my team, I don't think it's fair. And I'm not on either side. That's why it's easier, I think, for me to be ideologically consistent, is because I look at each thing and I go, okay, why do I feel that she was in the wrong in this instance? Not that she deserved it, but she was in the wrong, and it happened because of her actions, which is very different than deserving. So let me make that very clear. But again, we'll continue on without further interruption.
I've seen video of this that I think has been much more revealing than that. Again, it was the person who did the shooting, so it was from his perspective. I already gave the interpretations, the competing interpretations. Obviously, there was some, I guess you could call it, adversarial energy between the woman who was driving the car, who ended up killed, her wife, her partner, who was the woman with the short hair, who was speaking in a fairly condescending way to ICE agents. It's absolutely, you're right. You're allowed to speak. You don't have to speak deferentially and respectfully to agents of the state. You have the right to speak critically, especially when you're at a protest. The driver said, "I'm not mad at you, dude." And
that's exactly right. And that's why I said, that's why it's cherry picked by the right, is to try and vilify them. But she absolutely is within her rights to say whatever she wants. Yes, it's very rude. Yes, I wouldn't want to be friends with someone like that. But it is her right in the United States. Again, First Amendment, the most important one. She's allowed to say whatever she wants to the ICE agent.
It was not like a very polite, earnest statement. It had a tinge of sarcasm to it. And
that was why I gave the context as well about when, I saw a video where she was sitting in there, like, bouncing back and forth on her horn, making people go around her on either side. Like, she 100%, again, that because it doesn't show in that video, but just to show you, yes, that is what she was doing. She was obstructing justice, which is not exactly legal. And so that is, again, just something that I think is just an important context about it, but once again, does not justify what happened to her.
The wife of the woman who was shot was, being confrontational, saying, "We change our plates. We're going to have different plates the next time," kind of like mocking him in a light way. Nothing of that, independent of the driving, remotely justifies shooting an American citizen in the head in broad daylight on an American street, obviously. And I don't think that's the claim, but the claim is this shows that they had kind of an antagonistic relationship with ICE, which is a huge leap from that to this woman who had basically no criminal record, was raising a 6-year-old child, tried on that day to go run over ICE agents, kill them, be willing to go to jail, domestic terrorism, all of that. So that's the video that was released today. I think one of the things that we're seeing, and this is the point I actually want to emphasize, as opposed to just delving into the debate that is very tired by now. All the arguments are very well known about who was at fault, who wasn't. I've already given my view on that.
All right, and then we're skipping ahead a little bit here. Essentially what he is talking about in the part that we're going to skip, just for time constraints, but essentially what he was saying is he saw a bunch of people on the right celebrating this, and he basically was likening it to the left with Charlie Kirk, where they were just making these absolutely awful claims and celebrating her death and just saying awful things about her, vilifying her being a lesbian, saying, oh, good, we saved her, her child from being transed and all this sort of stuff, which is absolutely just disgusting. And I do not agree with that at all. Again, you can have two very, you can think two very kind of similar, I guess, things of what she did led to it, and rightfully so, but she didn't deserve it. You can think those two separate things, because that's the camp that I fall in. So again, to celebrate it, that's the disgustingness that the left did with Charlie Kirk, versus, hey, what happened. Yes, it's tragic. You wish it didn't happen. You wish she just got out of the car. You wish she wasn't there in the first place. I mean, again, it's her right to do that, but listen to the officers and what they're telling you. You're not going to get as bad of, a result as what happened here. And again, my point is, when you do what you did with your vehicle is a deadly weapon, and so it authorizes or justifies the use of deadly force to meet that action. Again, it's a tragedy that it happened, but that's a series of bad decisions that led up to that moment on both sides.
When you're a country like the United States that is constantly fighting wars in countless different countries, I think it's very important to realize that the United States is very, very anomalous in this regard. Only Israel fights as many wars in as many places, but the United States is the world champion, the undisputed world champion. Just to give you a comparison, China, the last time it fought a war was 1979. It's 47 years ago, and that war was a 1-month border dispute with Vietnam. They haven't had a war in 47 years. We've had dozens, depending on how you define war, but certainly bombing and changing governments and invading and droning. So we are a country that is very war inclined. We fight more wars by far than any other country.
And the funniest thing about this point to me, it's a very good point. That's why I'm, again, wanting to talk about this video, and that's why I think this is one of the main points in it, is that, yes, when that happens, if you're going to make the art, or if you remember, like, the video game panic of, because I being someone who plays video games, I had to deal with this growing up, where it's like, oh yeah, desensitization in video games and being able to see murder happening, and it's desensitizing our youth, and it's so awful, and blah, 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 blah. How can you not make that same argument about us constantly being in war? And then just in this recent round, right, with Gaza, where you're able to see on TikTok all of the, and good, it was good that you were able to, but you're able to see all of these awful atrocities happening over and over and over, and you're seeing it live, and you're seeing it happen, as it's happening, and you can witness all of these atrocities that Israel is committing with the backing of the United States. Well, then yes, of course it's going to have an effect on you. Like, if you think that video games had an effect, well, this is, at least people could know that it's video games, versus this is real life. These are the things, you're watching it happen to other humans. It's not pixels on a screen. It's live in 4K watching people get blown up. And so when that's happening, yes, of course, it's going to desensitize a population to these sorts of things. So again, that's why I think it's a very good point that he makes here, and then he'll further roll it out. But that's what I want to call out, the irony of, the people who are saying, oh yeah, the decrying of violence in video games, but they're not drawing that same conclusion to us constantly being in wars. Maybe we should try peace for once. Just a thought.
And when that happens, in order to get the population to accept those wars, to believe they're just, to support them, you have to constantly dehumanize other people. You have to constantly talk about them in a way that leads Americans to believe that their life has no value. They deserve to die. the world is a better place when their lives are extinguished. I've talked before about one of the things I really appreciate about the Catholic Church, and it's ironic that there are a lot of people who claim...
And that's a really good point, too, because, yes, and at some point in time, the people who have been propagating this, it's going to continue to ramp up until the point where, oh, look, the consequences to my actions. Oh, no. Like, yeah, you guys have been doing this the entire time. You've been greenlighting these wars forever. You've been villainizing Muslims and all these other groups that you can other to justify going in and, you know, doing awful atrocities to them. Well, then, yeah, you think you can just contain it to one little group? That's not going to happen. And that's, I think, a very good point if you think about why is there an increase in school shootings? Why are these things, you know, again, it's because this is the way that you are gearing everyone to think. You have to do it to be able to get any sort of support for these forever wars that just go on and on and on, and to be able to green light all this military action anywhere in the world. And I think, again, that's a very undercovered but very important point that he's bringing up here. All right, and then we're skipping ahead a little bit more just to get to a story that he tells that I think paints the picture perfectly. So we'll get into that right now.
I'll just tell you this quick story, and this is the last thing I'll say about this. When the United States killed Osama Bin Laden, finally found him in Pakistan under President Obama in 2010 or 11, I forget which, I think it was 2011, and we found him as this old, decrepit man who was sick and elderly, living with his wives in Pakistan. President Obama went on television that night to announce it. And I was in the United States that day, but I was flying back to Brazil that evening. So I was on an airplane when President Obama made the announcement that we had found and killed Osama bin Laden. And it was at the time, there was very little Wi-Fi on airplanes. And even if there is, I generally don't use Wi-Fi on planes. I like to use planes as a kind of off the matrix, disconnected time. So I didn't know when I landed in Brazil that the United States had found and killed Osama bin Laden. And I got to the airport and I got a cab, and the cab driver said, "Oh, where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I'm American, but I live here." And he said, "Did you see the news about how the United States had killed Osama bin Laden?" And I said, "What? No, I didn't see that. I was on the plane." He said, "Yeah, the United States killed Osama bin Laden." And that night there were these these celebrations in the streets of Washington and New York. People were waving the American flag and with their fists in the air, and were just raucous, like they had won the Super Bowl. And this cab driver said, "Look, I understand why the United States would kill Osama bin Laden. I can understand the arguments that it's justifiable. But what kind of people go around celebrating the extinguishing of human life? Like, even if you know, most countries, a lot of countries, is a Catholic country, Brazil is, it doesn't have the death penalty. And there's an idea of the sanctity of human life that probably comes from religion." And when he said that, I probably wouldn't have thought about this on my own, but I did realize, like, yeah, there is something very odd and probably unhealthy about human beings going around celebrating the fact that we just pumped bullets into some guy who was in his house, even if it's Osama bin Laden. And I do think that comes from, as Martin Luther King said, as studies show, as other historians of empires have pointed out, this has happened with other empires. When you're constantly killing people in faraway places, then it starts to infect the imperial capital. That a lot of our discourse has become extremely indifferent to the value of human life. It's not surprising to see people celebrating the assassination of someone like Charlie Kirk.
And that is, this is one of the really big points that I want to make, because I think that is a very good point that the cab driver called out to him. Because if you think about it, yeah, I mean, it's two very different things. And yes, I understand, okay, Osama bin Laden was seen as the person who perpetrated the 9/11 attacks, so getting him feels good to everyone, right? That's a feel-good moment. But there's a difference between, you know, you watch it happen, and you sit there and you say, or I guess not watch it, but it happens, you hear about it, and you just go, oh good, I'm glad they caught him, or they took him out, or however you want to phrase it. He's gone, he's no, he got what he deserved, whatever, however you want to phrase that, right? Versus going out and celebrating and pumping your fist and waving a flag. And again, that's celebrating versus just acknowledging and saying, oh yeah, this is a good thing, I'm glad we got him. And I think there is a distinction between those two actions. And that's why, once again, I think it is a fine line, right? Because you can still, again, be glad that he's gone, but it's not celebrating. And at the same token, again, with this Minnesota ICE action, you can say, okay, it came to its conclusion, she was at fault, she is the reason ultimately that led to her being shot, without also saying, good, she deserved it, I'm glad, I'm happy, and all the awful things about, just whatever is being said, right, in the right wing. And so that's just where, and this is the main reason why I wanted to call it out, is because it does say something deeply troubling when you're celebrating other people get murdered. And especially in the Osama Bin Laden circumstance, you can see why you would say, yes, okay, I get it. It is something that you may think is good, you may think needed to happen, and you would be justifiable in saying that. But again, going out into the streets and pumping your fist and waving flags and doing all these sorts of things, again, that is very troubling, because you're celebrating the murder. And it loses the weight of what actually happened. Like, I don't think any of the SEAL team that went in and took him out was waving flags and pumping fists. And I don't know, maybe because, they're in the military, maybe they were, who knows. But I would imagine that the weight of having to take a life would weigh on them. So, again, that's just my thoughts on it. At least in what it says about our culture. And I think it is very deeply troubling. And I think it's a very good example, and that's why I wanted to cover it, is because it is one where it could totally, I could see the justification why people would think that way and want to celebrate. But it's one where you just have to understand that anyone who would, and from an outsider's viewpoint, right? Someone in Brazil, a cab driver in Brazil, who says this is very, very troubling, and why would they? It says something about their culture that they would not just be glad it happened, but celebrate it. And again, I think it's a very fine line, but it's one that I think is important.
Or the killing of this woman, who's not a criminal, doesn't have a criminal record, never set out to hurt anybody before. She's definitely an activist. She's a left-wing activist. And if you don't share her politics, that should definitely not be enough for you, even if you think the ICE agent was justified, to start talking about her like she got what she deserved and you're happy she's dead. There's a lot of that sentiment, and it's very similar to how people reacted who disliked Charlie Kirk. And I think that is a sign of a pretty unhealthy, and even I would go so far to say, as a sick society. And I think it's very inextricably linked with our very aggressive and violent foreign policy. All right, next question.
And I completely agree with that, 100%. And that's exactly why I wanted to cover this, is because I think it's a more nuanced conversation, and I think it's more interesting than just, was she at fault? Did she do it? Was it the ICE agent was it their fault? Whose fault was it? That's a very surface level stupid take, right? That's a very small brain take. But if you actually dive deeper and say, okay, what is actually, dissect it, look at it for yourself, come to your own conclusion, but then you have to be ideologically consistent with it. And you should not be celebrating it. And again, we'll get into the ideologically consistent component of it right here in a second.
Actually, there's another point I wanted to make here about this killing by ICE in Minneapolis. The argument of those justifying it, principally on the right, is that if a law enforcement officer gives you an order, you should obey it and not ignore it or defy it. So if an ICE agent tells you get out of your car, you don't drive off, you get out of your car. And if you drive off, you're probably going to suffer consequences. I don't think in general we consider it justified to put bullets into the heads of people who flee a scene. In fact,
and I agree with that completely. Again, it's a series of actions that led to the outcome. But ultimately, where I draw that line, like, could the entire thing have been avoided if she had just gotten out of her vehicle? Yes, absolutely. But where I draw my line, once again, being ideologically consistent, is when she even remotely endangered someone else by assaulting someone with a deadly weapon, which is what a car is. If I drive at you at any speed, I could run you over and you die. That's a deadly weapon. That is literally the definition of a deadly weapon. If he got hit and run over with the tire, he's dead. He would not be here today. So then that is what I think justifies what happened, right? Especially because she's peeling out, like she's trying to go as fast as possible immediately. So he gets pinned under the car, he ends up hitting the post. Like, this is something that is entirely possible. So that is where I draw my line. But to say that, yes, her disobeying orders or anything like that, like, okay, they could, tire spike her, they could shoot out her tires, they could do any number of things up until the point where she almost hit an officer. Should the officer have been standing there in the first place? No. Again, it's a series of bad decisions across multiple groups that led to what happened.
That is not protocol for any police department. You're not justified in just shooting somebody because they're fleeing. And it's certainly not justified for ICE. That is a law enforcement agency that's supposed to be about protecting the border and deporting illegal immigrants, not American citizens, although there are times when they can act against American citizens. But the argument is that she defied an order of the police and therefore was to blame for starting this entire incident. And then at the same time, even if she weren't intending to kill the police officer, the fact that he had some reasonable fear that he was in danger justified pumping bullets into her head. And I understand that standard in theory, but one of the big controversies of the last 6 years was January 6th. And I was very much somebody who believed that the evils of January 6th were wildly exaggerated. I never considered it to be anything close to an insurrection, and I still don't.
Yeah, and I'm generally of his viewpoint. I think the majority of people that were there, like if you watch the actual videos, it was literally a bunch of people just like, oh, what's going on here? Just like, oh, I'm getting a tour of the government building. Like that's literally what it looked like to me. At least from a lot of the videos. Yes, there were things that were happening during, right, that were more aggressive. But yeah, this is why I like it. This is the last point that I wanted him to make and that I want to talk about, because I think it does illustrate, again, ideological consistency. And that's with me saying, again, I am generally along the lines of it was much ado about nothing. It was completely blown out of proportion. I don't think it was a great thing to do, but the way that they went after anyone who was there, right? Yes, there were some people that did worse things, but the way that they went, again, I'm just setting the stage with what my general opinion on most of the people who were there on January 6th and what I generally think about it. So just laying the stage. That's why I'm talking about it right now, but I'll let him continue through and then provide my additional thoughts on it.
And I consider it to be a protest that got a little bit out of hand and a lot out of hand and turned into a riot, but it was nothing that threatened the United States or its stability or the existence of the government. I thought the fatal shooting of Ashley Babbitt was horrific. She didn't pull out any arms. She wasn't engaged in violence. They just shot her. But if this is the standard, then it absolutely is the case, if you apply that standard January 6th, that the Capitol Police not only had the right to, but should have shot dozens of January 6th protesters. The vast, vast, vast majority of January 6th protesters were nonviolent. And that was one of the reasons I found their very excessive prosecution and imprisonment to be so outrageous.
And the big reveal on the whole thing, they should have been, in my opinion. Once again, I am extremely, say whatever you will about me, I am extremely ideologically consistent. And anyone who had any sort of possibly deadly weapon and was wielding it 100% should have been fair game for, I guess I'll say, I don't want to say retaliation, but self-defense with a deadly weapon in response to what they were doing. So anyone who, was getting assaulted, getting punched, getting attacked, because especially in a situation where it was snowy and icy, you could slip, hit your head on a pole or a step or pavement or whatever and die. So if that is something that is a possibility, then you're 100% justified that I don't feel safe. They should not have to get assaulted, right? You shouldn't have to stand for that. And so when someone is being aggressive towards you and assaulting you, then 100% any of those people who were there on January 6th and doing that should have been open game, more or less. And again, that might piss off people on the right who are happy to hear what I said about the protester in Minneapolis, right? The anti-ICE woman that lost her life. Well, guess what? Again, ideological consistency. And I think if you are hearing this and you're getting upset, you need to really think about why. Because that's completely ideologically consistent. You need to think about, why do I feel this way about this woman? And if it's just because she pissed you off, because she doesn't align with your ideals, you need to take a step back and actually think about these sorts of things more critically and get out of your little echo chamber. Because, again, I'm holding the same energy on both fronts. January 6th and anti-ICE protesters. And if your actions raise to making someone fear for their life, rightfully so, well, guess what? They can be met with that same energy, in my opinion.
We don't put people in prison for years for participating in a protest when they're not engaged in violence. They just walked into the Capitol simply because other people who...
And if you're on the left and you're pissed off about me saying this about January 6th, that it was overblown and most of them should be able... How do you feel about anyone else who is there protesting ICE, and any of them? If they're peaceful protesters, they can be there and they can say and do whatever they want. Again, I said that about the ICE protesters, and I'm saying that the same thing January 6th. Again, the majority should not have been prosecuted at all. Ideologically consistent. And if you're pissed off and you're on if you're on either side and you're pissed off about what I'm saying, again, you can be angry at me because you don't believe that, you don't agree with my opinion, right? But if you're not ideologically consistent on both fronts, if you say the woman who was driving the car and hit the ICE officer shouldn't have been shot, but you think the people who were prosecuted for January 6th, it was good that they were prosecuted, again, same thing, you're in a cult, but just on the opposite side.
Who were there did engage in violence. That is not a form of acceptable American justice. But there was a minority, and not a couple of people, but dozens, who did use violence on January 6th, and they used it against police officers. And I don't mean they just punched the police officer. I mean they beat the shit out of police officers. They used flagpoles and sticks and fists and stun guns and whatever they could get their hands on. And these police officers were outnumbered.
And that is exactly why I say it's justified, right? Because if you get hit with a flagpole, the other thing is the mob mentality. That's probably why they didn't do anything in the first place, because they were afraid they would get overrun by and basically foment mass hysteria, and then they would probably have died, right? Because no one died on the scene. Yes, they may have gotten beaten up, but like no one died. But I do 100% think that they would be justified in defending themselves and using lethal force to do so. Again, if you are being assaulted, and once again, I say they probably didn't because they were afraid that the mob would turn on them, but I would 100% say they were justified in using, again, lethal force against anyone who was taking any of those actions, who was assaulting another police officer. They're 100% in the right. And again, that is why I say ideologically consistent. If you're listening to this, I want you to think about your viewpoint on each of these and get yourself out from whatever entrenched side you're in if this is making you upset about the things that I'm saying. Again, you can completely disagree with me, but you need to set your level for what you think is acceptable, and you need to keep it the same for both parties. You can't be more strict towards another party just because you disagree with them. Because I think that's what's making our country worse. Is that exactly to the point that I was making in the middle. You're vilifying a certain group of people because they're not your group. You need to remove yourself from your group. You need to think logically about things, and you need to be ideologically consistent. I'll say it a million times because it's so important.
They absolutely had a reasonable basis to fear for their lives. And several police officers, that was exaggerated by the media, died on January 6th. Several of them were seriously injured, seriously and permanently injured. Many of them were hospitalized. And there's no doubt they had a reasonable fear for their lives and for their physical safety. And obviously, the people who were beating the shit out of them were defying orders, legal orders from a law enforcement agency that was telling them to stay out of the Capitol. Most of this happened outside of the Capitol when they were trying to prevent people coming in. A lot of the protesters were allowed in and just waltzed in. Again, those were the nonviolent ones, but the ones who beat the police officers with weapons, with things they picked up that severely injured them, whether it was outside or inside, why didn't the police have the right to just gun dozens of them down? Just put bullets in them. If that's justified whenever someone defies a legal order of the police and puts the police in reasonable fear of their physical well-being and safety and life. And I have absolutely zero doubt that if there was some kind of Antifa protest or Black Lives Matter protest, and there was a police officer who was being beaten by, say, 8 Antifa protesters with flagpoles and 2x4s and metallic objects, and as a result pulled out his gun out of fear for his life and shot one or several, everybody on the right would defend that police officer and say he was absolutely within his right to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just look at the whole Kyle Rittenhouse thing. That's literally the exact same thing in reverse. And once again, ideologically consistently, they were beating him with skateboards. There was a bunch of guys coming at him. He was totally justified, in my opinion. Same thing. It's about ideologically consistent beliefs.
There's no way to, if that's the standard you're upholding, to say that Capitol Hill police officers didn't have that same right, that they should have gunned down multiple people on January 6th, the ones who were using violence. But the reason these standards aren't being applied is the point. It's that this is political violence. It's politically motivated violence. People are cheering when their political adversaries, Charlie Kirk or the woman in Minnesota who has left-wing politics. When the political enemies, people with different political views than you are killed, that's when you jump into action and start defending it and cheering it. There are no consistent standards. There are no coherent views about when this should happen. I personally think, like war, which should be a last resort, should be a last resort for law enforcement agencies to fatally shoot American citizens on the streets of the United States. And I don't think that would have been the case on January 6th, and I don't think that was the case in Minnesota. But some people, when I made this point, said, yeah, I think the ICE shooting was justified, and I think the Capitol Police would have been in the rights to just gun down people on January 6th. And at least that's consistent. What bothers me a lot is not just the inconsistency, but the fact that there seems to be a politically motivated view of who should live and who should die. And societies that abandon the universal sanctity of life and start cheering for the death of their political opponent almost always end up in very dark places. And I also think, as the question suggested, that we very well may be headed there.
And that's essentially exactly why I wanted to cover this, because I think it brought up a lot of very good points. Again, wove together that narrative, exactly what I wanted to talk about. I think this is a much more interesting conversation than just what happened and how do I feel about it, because it is a larger message that needs to be talked about. And another reason why I wanted to cover it is, once again, because you see that even between Glenn and myself, we would have a disagreement, right? Where I think it's justified, he does not. But at the same time, hopefully you pick up on this from earlier in the video, but I completely respect his opinion. I understand where he's coming from. And just because he and I have a difference of opinion, because I am, again, ideologically consistent, he respects people who are, and I respect people who are. And again, that's why I said at the beginning, on the onset, is that yes, he's very in the middle. He's not going to go to one side or another because of his political views. He's going to be consistent, and I respect that. And I think everyone should be able to respect that, because once again, it proves that you're not in one camp or the other. And I think everyone needs to come together and really look at, okay, it's just the government is trying to divide us, and at any point in time, they can just change their narrative, and then you have to go along with it, or you're cast out of the camp. But what you should do is you should say, I don't want to be a part of that camp anyway. I'm going to look at, okay, what is this person doing? What are they doing for me? Each politician. Do I agree with them? Do I not? What is in my best interest? And vote in that manner. Because when you're captured by a party, well then you look stupid. Because on a dime, you're willing to change all of your beliefs just to conform with the party that you belong to. And I don't think that's how anyone should live their life. I think people need to think through these sorts of things and come up with their own conclusions. Because then at the end of the day, you can explain to someone else, and I think this is very important, you can explain, here's why I think the things that I do. And that's why I can talk to people who are on the far left or on the far right. And when you can explain to something, here's why I think that, you can still be friends with them. And at the end of the day, in my opinion, the most important thing about someone is, are they a good person? It doesn't matter what they believe, because 99% of their beliefs are not going to impact you. Okay, they go out and they vote, but unless a lot of other people agree with them, well then they're not going to get their way. And if a lot of other people agree with them, then maybe you're wrong. And you need to have some sort of humility around that. But I think that's the most important thing, is people need to take a step back. They need to unpolitically charge themselves. They need to look at it, and your basis, once again, for who you decide to watch, who you're friends with, who you surround yourself with, should be, are they good people? And that should be the only thing that matters. But once again, just thought it was a very interesting conversation. If you like content like this, drop me a subscription down below. It really does help my channel grow. And if you have made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.